Gentlemen,
can I please have your attention? Can you dig it?
Greetings, dear listeners. This is Jonah Goldberg, host of the Remnant podcast, brought to you by the Dispatch and Dispatch Media. This is a very exciting episode, not for the content per se, but because I am back in an actual studio in the Cosmo the Wonder Dog Memorial Studio at the American Enterprise Institute. Until they sell the naming rights for this thing, I'm just going to name it whatever the hell I want. And I have with me the pundit of pundits, the ne plus ultra of punditry.
The rankest.
The rankest of pundits. We're talking Naples at low tide of punditry. None other than my dear friend and colleague twice over, Christopher Stirewalt. Christopher, welcome back to the Remnant.
When did the Remnant begin? What year did the Remnant begin?
It's an excellent question. I want to say something like 2017-ish, 2018-ish?
2017, 2018. And I was transported back today to my first appearance on El Remnantito in this very studio long ago in this building. And I came here to do your still new podcast. And I marveled. I said, this is the life, brother. This is the life. Unlimited sparkling waters, frescas flowing like water itself, and all of these nice, lovely people. And I said, I got to get me some of this. This is the life that I have to get. Little did I know that one day I would come to be the poor man's Jonah Goldberg, podcasting in this very studio, hanging out at AEI. What an interesting life.
That's right. We should say that your podcast with the lovely and talented Eliana Johnson, Inkstained Wretches.
Inkstained Wretches drops in this very studio when I am not leading the itinerant life of a pundit.
Yes, but when we record The Remnant, there's a lot less cocaine.
Yeah, I mean, not none, but, a lot less.
Yeah, I mean, these are important distinctions.
Quality's good, though.
So we've gotten complaints in the past because we don't get straight to the punditry, which I find one of the weirdest complaints ever. But in honor of you, I wore to AEI today one of the only souvenirs I got from my recent crust Midwestern travels. My Piggly Wiggly hat from the Piggly Wiggly in somewhere in central Wisconsin. I can't remember the town now. Basically, the day we talked.
Oh, right.
I stopped. On the way to wherever we were going, we stopped at a Piggly Wiggly, and I said, I must have this hat.
Because I dig pigs?
No, you're much more of a man of the people. And is Piggly Wiggly, there a Piggly Wiggly in West Virginia?
So the Piggly Wiggly, I'm fascinated with the business history of Piggly Wiggly. So sorry, punditry lovers. So because of the woman who I'm going to marry, Jessica Malugin, who is an antitrust expert, and the antitrust people that she has introduced me to, people like Tim Walz, I now know the story of the A&P and Piggly Wiggly and how A&P was so dominant in the American grocery store space that it crushed, that it was a target of all this antitrust action and all this stuff. And then guess who came along? Piggly Wiggly. The Piggly Wiggly was the Amazon to A&P's Walmart.
That's right.
And the Piggly Wiggly exploded their monopoly and beat them and changed the whole game in grocery stores and did all of that stuff. And when I was a boy in Wheeling, West Virginia, we still had an A&P. We still had an A&P, but they were almost gone.
Yeah. So my understanding is that the way they did that was A&P absolutely owned urban supermarkets.
Yep.
And then the Mr. Wiggly, Herb to his friends, realized that people are moving to the suburbs and they had cars now. And so if you want to do a big shopping, you didn't have to, like, I grew up 84th and Broadway. We shopped primarily at the Red Apple supermarket on like 82nd and Broadway. And we brought, one of those like essentially laundry carts because you had to put your groceries in something to bring them home. You couldn't carry all the bags and that kind of thing. And it used to be shopping carts in much of urban America, not just New York. They was still in DC when I first moved here, had these little hanging hooks on the front of the shopping cart where you would hang your rolling cart while you shopped.
Oh, and transfer your goods.
And then you
to
transferred your goods at the end, right? Because especially like the old ladies, they couldn't carry
I can
grocery
picture.
bags, right?
I can picture the collapsible kind of basket. Yes.
And but it makes total sense that once you have a car, you would do a big shopping, and then you would just go to the local, little. In my land, we would call them the bodega, to get your bits and pieces. And Piggly Wiggly was the one that blew all that up. And then, and I will say, the people at the Piggly Wiggly in Wisconsin were among the nicest people I met in my entire trip.
Piggly Wiggly is a quality chain. I grew up in a Kroger, obviously, growing up in the Ohio Valley, grew up in a Kroger household. But in my hometown, you still had a fish market. You still had a meat market. You still had those things. And what's interesting about all of this to me as a person who is obsessed and thinks about food, approximately 70% of the time that I am awake, is that we cycled all the way through, right? The big grocery stores got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And now what are we back to? I again have a meat market. I have a fish market. The specialty providers have come back in because taste changed again and the way that people shop again. And I love it. I love the assertion of human nature in the marketplace over and over and over again.
Having a good butcher in your life is a really important thing.
Union meats. I love you, Union meats.
Okay, so we got the important stuff out of the way.
Yes, clearly.
And speaking of meat and fish and these kinds of things, something with a similar shelf life is vice presidential debate punditry.
This changes everything
for the next 24 hours. And then it'll be like, oh, was that Tuesday? So go any direction that you want to go. Cosmic, global, picayune, grievance pandering, whatever. What'd you make of the debate last night?
So I wrote a piece for the Dispatch. You may be familiar with it. Very popular. Many people say it's the best website. And I wrote a piece that posed a question. Is J.D. Vance a phony in the typical way that politicians are phony? Or is he something radically different?
Phony like a fox?
Well, no, phony like a crazy person, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. So I use the analogy of there was a wonderful piece that Mark Leibovich wrote for The Atlantic about what a phony Tim Walz is, because Tim Walz is a phony. But in the normal tolerances of phoniness and how he plays up this shtick about the dad and blah, 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 as he said, a convincing beta, when that is not who Tim Walz really has been in his life. And he's a very ambitious person. And he's only 6 months older than Kamala Harris.
Right.
Despite looking approximately 600 years older than Kamala Harris.
He looks like he shops in the same section of the clothing store that you and I probably shop.
Yes, that's right. He is definitely a guy who has a stack of Kohl's coupons that he is going to definitely redeem one of these days. And then the question about J.D. Vance is, when J.D. Vance does stuff like go on Tucker Carlson's tour, when he does stuff like ginning up stories about Haitians eating cats, when he does these incendiary, the way that he conducted himself during the 2022 Ohio Republican Senate primary was just deplorable, right? Mm-hmm. It was bananas, and he continues to push the envelope. So there's a category of Republicans who believe that he was faking that stuff,
right?
And that the old J.D. Vance, the AEI J.D. Vance, the thoughtful, best-selling author, is still in there, and that this is stuff that he has to say in order to get by in the Trumpian era. And so the phoniness argument, people don't mind phoniness in politicians if they're phony the way they like them.
Yeah.
And J.D. Vance, so the question is, basically, does he mean the Tucker Carlson stuff? And some of his biggest admirers will say, not really. And so I wondered which J.D. Vance shows up, And not only did Mr. Nice Guy J.D. Vance show up, but in the best version, the best iteration of that we've seen, even better than at the Republican convention. If you were let me digress further by just saying, vice presidential nominees are not about persuading persuadables as much as they are tending to the base.
Mm-hmm.
Tim Walz was a pick for the base. J.D. Vance was definitely a pick for the base, but left out an important constituency, which was normie Republicans, right? J.D. Vance, with his views on foreign policy, made the Nikki Haley kind of primary voter very uncomfortable. J.D. Vance spoke to those voters. He didn't change a jot or a tittle of his policy, but he sounded Reagan-esque. He said, we're talking about peace through strength. So if you were a Republican looking for an excuse to vote for Donald Trump, J.D. Vance maybe helped you a little bit.
Okay, so let me flip it around. I recently wrote a column, originally for the LA Times, also can be now found at the Dispatch, where I read this piece by Ron Brownstein at The Atlantic that I kind of felt like, oh crap, I've missed this point. It's like I've been making two arguments consistently for a very long time, that there aren't a lot of persuadable voters left, which we've talked about many times, right? And that both parties have convinced themselves that they can't be majority parties, so they just try to turn up the gain on the base, starting with Obama, right? And then Trump steals Cruz's strategy and all that kind of stuff.
And 04 too.
With 04, yep. Absolutely, yeah. And so I think both of those things are true, but Brownstein made a point that kind of added as Jack Donaghy in 30 Rock would say, a third kind of heat.
A third heat. That's right.
He points out that among the pros, there are persuadable voters, which we can call like gettable voters, right?
Right.
And then there are irregular voters, which we've normally called low-propensity voters.
Yes.
Right? And so none of this is new to me, but like the thing that sort of like made me slap my forehead was he pointed out in 2020, highest turnout election in a century, in raw numbers, highest turnout election ever, right?
And as a percentage in the modern era, since you had post-Civil Rights Act, post-full participation of women in the workforce, right. So the highest turnout election, even as a percentage, really ever.
Right. After all those wrong turns. I kid. Do not send me mail. That was a joke. But he says, of potential voters in 2020, roughly about 80 million people didn't vote.
Sure.
Right. And so the choice isn't trying to get the voters who haven't decided between Trump and Harris. I'm sure they're doing that, micro-targeting, yada, 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 right? But that is a tiny number of voters compared to the vast reserve army of gettable voters whose choice is between voting for the candidate they like,
right,
and not voting at all, right? Staying on the couch.
That's right.
And so one of the reasons why I kind of feel like maybe, like I think we both agree, which is why we just skipped over it, on points, Vance won, right?
Yeah.
Clearly, right? I don't think anybody disputes it.
Tim Walz looked so nervous for the first hour of that debate. He could not have passed a greased BB. He was just, and I do believe that he prepared for the wrong thing. Right? Yeah. I think he prepared for pugilistic, cruel,
cat lady Vance.
Sharp J.D. Vance, and instead got nice boy from Ohio who, gosh darn it, just wants to serve his country. And Walz was totally thrown for a loop and was very nervous.
Right. But at the same time, so if you look at like Trump's dark speech last weekend, which he called dark, not me. Right?
Yeah.
And when Trump,
is this one where a very violent hour will cure?
Yes.
A
purge will
purge. But he's a busy man. He doesn't have time for a full day long purge. He just wants a 1 hour purge.
And where he called, and these are quotes, he said that illegal immigrants aren't human beings; they're vile animals. He said that they'll come into your house and slit your throat, all this kind of stuff, right? That is geared. If we're going to assume that there is a strategy behind what Trump is doing, that is geared at the people who. I said it's an assumption.
Okay. All right.
I got Stirewalt skeptical face. If you were wondering why we had that hiccup there,
a dubious lip pout.
And I'll caveat it to address your skepticism right now. It may be that the campaign has decided this is the only strategy they can go with because the candidate won't do anything else.
This is the Clyde the orangutan theory of Donald Trump. You've got the orangutan. He's going to do a lot of damage. What do we do to make the most out of it?
Right. He can only do orangutan things.
Right.
So let's figure out how to get the most mileage out of orangutan-ness. So that's all fine. If you are one of these voters who is kind of in the Alex Jones universe, in the resistance thing that Tucker's now involved in, if you're one of the people that increasingly Elon Musk is constantly talking to about democracy will be over if Trump doesn't win, right? Those are the kinds of arguments that will get you off the couch, right? And Vance has carved out this place for himself as the articulator of those people's grievances and views. And so going on stage and being Mr. Nice Guy, I would not be surprised if there's a sizable number of those people who are kind of disappointed and are like, well, wait a second. He's talking about how we need more bipartisanship and I could work with people like Tim Walz to take care of people and blah, 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 blah. That's not the apocalyptic vision I'm looking for. Like, why do I bother to vote if there's not that much difference between these guys?
So what do we know about non-voters? We know a lot about non-voters.
Carbon-based, bipedal.
Carbon-based, bipedal. Uh-huh. They are not big news consumers. There's a strong correlation between consumers of news and news adjacent or news like products, news loaf, and voter propensity. We've seen it. It's been well documented. The strongest correlations we have for voting about likelihood to vote are age, education, and income. The older you are, the richer you are, and the better educated you are, the more likely you are to be a voter. About 20% of people in their 20s vote. About 70% of people in their 70s vote. It's coincidental. It's just a good rule of thumb. So who are the non-voters? Who's out there? They skew young and they skew poor. And they skew, what did Donald Trump say? I love the poorly educated. Mm-hmm. So and this is something we've talked about many times, which is what happens if we had compulsory voting in America and the other 80 million voters came in, right? Mm-hmm. So you got your I think there'll be about 150 million voters this time, but we keep cranking it up. I don't know. We may get back to a 2020 number. I'm not sure. But let's say it's about 150 million voters. How do the 80 million how are they different from the ones who are there? We don't know that much about them except to say this. I believe that Republicans have for generations mistakenly believed that they would be in trouble
if everyone voted.
If everybody voted. Right. Because I tend to think, especially as the Republican Party fetishized having working class support, that there's a bunch of those voters that they do very well with, except for this part. Younger voters do skew Democratic. And I think there's a decent chance that if everybody got in the pool, it would turn out about the same. Mm-hmm. That if everybody got in the pool, it might move individual states in different and interesting directions. But I think as a nation as a whole, maybe it would be about the same. Maybe the overlay would be that way.
We've talked about this on previous podcasts, and I've written about this. There's a book, a couple books that get into this. You know, if 1,200 people properly randomly picked are indicative of what the electorate is going to look like, then presumably 100 million people voting is a pretty good sample size as a poll.
Right.
Right. And so, yeah, like you're going to turn out different constituencies at the margins more one way or the other. But generally speaking, my understanding from the political scientists who look at this stuff, if everybody voted, you wouldn't want to bet a lot of money that the elections would go very differently than they would, which doesn't mean they wouldn't tie or anything like that. But like the reserve army is pretty representative of the voting army.
So maybe think about it this way. Think about the unproven reserves of additional voters. So you start out, you got 63 million Republican votes and 66 million Democratic votes. Put them in the bank. You lock them in. They're already there. Now, every next cut off of that salami, right? Every slice that you go in is going to be a little different than the one before it as you push deeper into lower and lower propensity voters.
Right.
Who are these folks that are the hardest to get out? If you get all the way to the end, what are you talking about? You're talking about very elderly people, very poor people, very rurally isolated people, very unusual people. You have some very unusual slices of salami.
Also a lot of urban poor. I mean, there are those people too. Yeah.
Yes. Just people who are not in the mainstream of American middle class life. Who is in the next? The question isn't what if they all voted. The question is, what are those slices of salami like as you move into the log of the 80 million? What Democrats believe, and there's decent reason to believe this, is that the slices that come in a higher turnout election this year will be in their advantage, that they will benefit from that because it will be younger voters, and it will be people who are lower propensity voters. They're going to come in and going to do it. I don't know whether that's true. And this year offers a really interesting question, which is Donald Trump running better or is he polling better? And we will not know until 2 days after Election Day because, well, we'll know a lot. When the polls close in North Carolina, we're going to know an awful lot. But the question is there another slice of salami that really loves Donald Trump and is going to come in and that we haven't seen? There's new polls out this week from Amy Walter and the folks at Cook Political Report. The fine people there, looking at these kinds of questions about Trump's ceiling. There's one theory of the case that says Trump is going to get pretty much the same share of the electorate, whatever the size, right? Because his share of the electorate, the electorate grew enormously, right? But he got about the same share of the electorate as he did in 2020 as he did in 2016. And if you go down to the state level, it's consistent there too, right? It's consistent there too. He's meeting his numbers now, right? He's where he was in 2020 in polls now. Harris is not hitting Biden's numbers, and certainly not as consistently as she was. So the question is, are there persuadable voters who might yet say, you know what, I've been holding out on Donald Trump, but I'm in, and that he's really going to win the national popular vote? Because if Donald Trump replicates his polling overperformance from previous years, he's going to win the national popular voter. It's going to be pretty close to tied, which would be extraordinary for a person who has been consistently unpopular and is such a divisive figure. There's the other theory of the case that says Kamala Harris is the less well-known individual and the holdouts are going to break in her favor and that she's going to end up doing 53%, right? And that it will tip in the other direction. And we just don't know.
All right, so I want to come back to some of those things, but just to move it back to my point about the debate for 2 seconds. Also, it seems to me that salami is the wrong...
I didn't want to say bologna because I didn't want to be pejorative.
Well, bologna is the same problem too, because bologna and salami...
The homogeneity.
The slices don't change as you cut deeper, right? I think the way to think about it is like caramel swirl ice cream.
Okay.
Where the caramel tends to settle more on the bottom, so each scoop from the top yields a slightly different mix as you go down.
I was going to use coal as the analogy, but I realized that I would be going in a direction that not everybody would be able to follow along if I talked about the difference in coal seams.
Okay. Well, we could also do like bags of 1980s era marijuana.
Yes.
Where the buds are up top and then the bottom
seeds
stuff is seeds instead of the bottom. You know, but these are
twigs and boulders.
We will convene a seminar on proper analogies for cephalogy. My only point is that if the theory of the case in Trump world is to activate more of the Alex Jones, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens people, and that's why Vance was picked, or that's the highest utility for Vance. Because if you are a moderate, decent, middle-class person who really doesn't want to vote for Harris and really doesn't like Trump, I'm not sure Vance being Mr. Nice Guy moves you.
But wait, if you have been told that J.D. Vance is a monster, and you have been alarmed by the things that you have heard J.D. Vance say. And then this version, this fellow, so you have the baby face J.D. Vance, right? The pre-beard J.D. Vance, who looks very soft and very lovely with his big expressive eyes. He looks sort of like a Disney character. Mm-hmm. And then you have the hard J.D. Vance, the beard J.D. Vance, the J.D. Vance. And if you've been told that this guy is basically the Antichrist and Tucker Carlson's best friend, and then this fellow shows up on stage, politics is not about being good. It's about being better than they think you are.
Yeah, I get that.
And I think whatever post facto theory of the case that Donald Trump Jr. and whoever came up with why it's actually a super genius move to pick J.D. Vance are wrong. Mm-hmm. I think that the question that J.D. Vance answered is, how ambitious is J.D. Vance versus how potentially crazy is J.D. Vance? He seemed like a person who was a lot more ambitious than he was crazy. And I think that will probably, we're talking about states where the margins are going to be potentially so narrow, right? And if you knew that J.D. Vance could affect the votes of 500 people in the state of Georgia in that debate, what would the Republican Party pay? Yeah. How much money would they pay if they could move 500 votes off of the couch and in? Getting low propensity voters to vote is really, really, really hard. Getting higher propensity voters to vote is, not surprisingly, much easier. The Republicans have a problem, and Georgia illustrates it very well, which is the highest propensity voters, married, college-educated, suburban voters, have been sitting out things for the Republicans. And the suburbs are 50% of the vote in the United States. You move them 1 point, right? This is sort of like when we were talking about in Michigan and the Arab American vote and Dearborn and we have 10,000 people, And I was saying at the time, if you move the white middle class electorate in Michigan by 0.5%, it obliterates those numbers. You turn the battleship. It's the differences are so huge. My idea would be they picked J.D. Vance for unusual reasons, but J.D. Vance is very ambitious and good at this. Mm-hmm. And whatever he had to say or do to become the emblem of these people and feel this way, if it doesn't suit his interests, and I saw somebody report, and I apologize, I don't remember who, but he told someone that the people preparing him told him to sound like Mitt Romney. Mm-hmm. And that's correct. That was the empirically correct thing for him to do, was soothe high propensity suburban voters. My shorthand for them is Youngkin Biden voters. Mm-hmm. They want to vote Republican. They want lower taxes. They want strong national defense. They want the traditional suite of turn of the century Republican virtues. And they just need an excuse to do it.
All right. So keeping you from going towards issues of polling issues is sort of like trying to keep
I know
my dingo from going after the deer carcass. You can have temporary success,
but I'm always going to go back to the center.
Vigilance is a constant.
And you're going to have to hose me off.
All right, so we'll get to more of that in a second. My only point was that I think Vance, I agree with you, Vance helped himself a lot. I'm less persuaded that he helped the ticket.
I don't know whether Donald Trump liked what he did.
Yeah.
I don't know whether Donald Trump liked what he did because it was off-brand, right? It was too Romney-like. It was too nice. It was too conciliatory. We know the sad tale of Donald Trump spokespeople over the years getting thrown over because they were not awful. Because that's what he wants. And I don't know what Donald Trump thought of that. And I especially don't know what Donald Trump thinks today when all the papers are saying, J.D. Vance, you did a great job by being normal. Molly Ball's piece in the Wall Street Journal today, Trumpism, but better, basically. And those kinds of headlines, I would imagine, will not please Donald Trump. But in terms of getting Donald Trump elected, he did exactly the correct thing by my estimation. Exactly the correct thing.
Yeah. There's one thing that really pisses off the orangutan, it's when the chimpanzee rides the tricycle.
Exactly.
Much better.
Yeah. That sailor hat is mine. You give that back. There is no way.
All right. So again, I feel like I've listened to 3 days worth of punditry about the debates. I don't want to dwell on it too long, but one last thing on Walz. Like everyone criticizes Harris for having these canned, staged, prepared riffs. And I don't mind being annoyed by that, but this is something that we've been annoyed by our entire adult lives. I mean, like, remember the Saturday Night Live 1988 presidential debate parody where with John Lovitz as Dukakis and Dana Carvey as Bush, and Bush answers every question. Stay the course, wouldn't be prudent, whatever. And then the moderators are like, sir, you have another 45 seconds. And he goes, stay the course. You know, he stays on message, right? Like, staying on message is just a thing about politics. Right. And like, but they make it sound like it's proof of Harris being different than a normal politician, when in fact it's Trump who's not a normal, because he can't stay on message, right? And it's one of these sort of change the norm kind of things. I don't, you and I, you do a lot more TV than I do, but we both do a lot of TV. We do a lot of talking. We give speeches and all this kind of stuff. I don't understand how politicians who give more speeches than either of us combined can go into a debate with a more foreseeable need than having a good prepared answer on the Tiananmen thing with Walz. What is your theory of the case about how he buttered that? Because I can come up with a perfectly, I think, serviceable answer pretty easily. And he couldn't come up with something with a team of consultants.
I think he prepared for the wrong J.D. Vance, and I think he was prepared for combat. He was prepared to have J.D. Vance just dropping bombs down his smokestack, and he got that different version. And I think that the rehearsals that he had done, he worked with Pete Buttigieg, who played J.D. Vance, which is not a bad choice. Pete Buttigieg is sort of the Democrats' version of a J.D. Vance.
Automatons of the meritocracy kind of type.
Right. And military service, elite, blah, blah, blah. It would depend, though, on what kind of J.D. Vance that he portrayed. I get this. Here's my sense of Tim Walz. Tim Walz is and I say this with no animus. He's a hack.
Yeah.
He's a hack, Paul.
Yeah.
And
so is Biden.
There's nothing wrong. Yeah. In a nation of 330 million people, you need a lot of hack Pauls, right? Yeah. It's very unlikely that the governor of your state is going to be a gifted visionary. What you mostly need is somebody who can run the plays, get it done, do this stuff. Tim Walz's ambition is, as Leibovich points out, is much greater than he lets on, and that he was looking at a 2028 presidential run. The way that Kamala Harris came to pick Tim Walz was that he had fooled or convinced progressives that he was really with them, right? And that the previous version of Tim Walz was not the real Tim Walz, that the moderate NRA guy from the rural suburban district was not the real Tim Walz. The real Tim Walz was this very progressive governor.
The tool of the teachers unions.
That's right. Yeah. And that's who he really was. And Kamala Harris saw a way out. She saw a way, because you and I talked about this at the time. Was the selection of Tim Walz a nod to that she was going to run a base campaign and that she was really going to play to the base like Trump does? Or was it the last payment to the progressive wing of the Democratic Party? And we got our answer, right? She said, okay, Bernie, okay, Elizabeth, okay, AOC, I'm taking your guy. I'm not taking the scary Jewish guy from Pennsylvania. I'm taking your guy, the one that you told me that you wanted to take. Now, let us discuss the merits of American domestic energy production.
Yeah.
Let us talk about how much I look forward to shooting someone who breaks into my house. Let us talk about how we will support Israel against Iran. Let us talk about all of this stuff. Her moves to the middle have been so... Joe Biden couldn't have done any of it, even if he wanted to. And I bet he would have wanted to, but he couldn't have done any of it because they would have been holding him hostage. The progressive left would have never given Biden the chance to go. Harris has the advantage that Obama had, that Ronald Reagan had, that a bunch of successful candidates have had, which is a wink candidate. A wink candidate is somebody who looks at a constituency that they need that's part of their coalition and says, you know me. You got it. Don't worry about what I'm about to say. Don't worry about this stuff that I'm about to say because you know I'm good for it later on. When Barack Obama talked about there's no red America, there's no blue America, when he talked about all of that stuff and his love, remember Barack Obama love for Tom Coburn? Oh my gosh, you would have thought that they had been married. Well, actually they worked on one kind of small bill together. Yeah. But Dick Lugar and Tom Coburn and his love for these Republicans, he knew he could do it because he was like, and my middle name is Hussein, right? And I'm a former state senator from the south side of Chicago. So we got it. You guys aren't going to worry about me. The Kamala Harris is asking for that level of permission from the Democratic base, and so far she's gotten it.
So the day after they picked Walz, I had predicted that I was pretty bought in that he'd be a bad pick. And then I saw his debut in Philly. I thought he did a really good job. And I was like, vibes, this guy is likable. Maybe this makes a lot of sense. I remember saying on CNN, I was like, this could have been a really smart play. But if Harris loses Pennsylvania, it's obviously a stupid pick.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that holds. I do think it would have been really interesting to see Shapiro debate Vance last night.
I was thinking about it the whole time. I was thinking the whole time. And I don't know if it would have been better. Shapiro is sharp. He is in both senses of that word.
Yeah.
And he and Vance would have had a very different debate. CNN did a poll, and I will say that post-debate who won polls are not my favorite thing.
Yeah, they're stupid.
Because the only people you can poll are people who stayed up to watch the debate.
Right.
And who's going to stay up to watch debate is hardly a representative sample. There are no undecided voters who stayed until the 91st minute of the debate and have strong opinions about it. So, and it's also the demographic is going to skew older, is going to skew wealthier and higher education levels. So you're going to get a more democratic sample anyway. But I don't believe that there's anybody who was ready to vote for Kamala Harris who saw Tim Walz's performance and said, well, I'm out.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
I listened to some pundits say, imagine him in the Situation Room. Bro, nobody will imagine Tim Walz doing anything, right? No one will say, I was ready to go for Kamala Harris. But having seen Tim Walz's uncertainty on his Tiananmen Square answer, no, that's not how that works. A running mate is a billboard. And you put it up by the side of the road to say, this is what I want to tell you something about myself, and something Kamala Harris wanted America to know was, I like nice white dudes with white hair from the middle of the country. Just the same reason that Barack Obama chose Joe Biden. Yeah. Don't be worried about me. I'm okay. I may look different from you. I may have a different story than yours, but some of my best friends are working class white people.
All right. So, you ever see the movie The Edge, the David Mamet movie about Anthony Hopkins and Alec Baldwin running away from a giant grizzly bear?
It's a great movie.
I really like the movie. And the bear is an actor named Bart the Bear.
I know his work.
And one of the best grizzly bear actors.
Top 5 anyway.
Of the last 30 years, easily.
Exactly. And Gentle Ben sucked.
And my wife and I saw a documentary about Bart the Bear. And to get him to do normal tricks, you give him sort of normal treats. But when he does a really good job at a hard trick, you give him his favorite, which is a bowl of vanilla ice cream and trout. So having managed to get you to go through the debate stuff, your bowl of ice cream and trout is to talk about this fight between Nate Silver and Nate Cohn about the theory is that because Kamala is overperforming with white voters, getting sort of your point about moving suburban voters even a half a percentage point is really, really valuable because there's just so friggin' many of them, right? So she's doing overperforming a bit with white voters. And the whole argument about the electoral, tell me if I got this wrong, whole argument about the electoral college being an advantage for Republicans is that in the swing states, they're disproportionately white. The states you need to get to 270 at the end are disproportionately white, disproportionately older. And so that gives a candidate like Donald Trump there's a reason why only one Republican candidate has won the popular vote since 2000. It was Bush in 2004, right? And because Trump is overperforming with blacks and Hispanics.
Well, with Hispanics.
Right? And young black men to a certain extent.
Yes, there's evidence to show black men under 50. Trump was doing better under Biden. We don't have enough information for me to be totally satisfied at this.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But so that helps explain why he's doing better in those Sunbelt states, right?
Yeah.
Now, first of all, do you think this theory of the case is and everyone has lots of caveats, but do you think that the evidence is there yet to say that the Republican advantage in the Electoral College is, I don't want to say erased, but diminished?
So those states, the 7 states, were and I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact number, but taken together were 1.6 or 1.7 points more Republican than the nation as a whole in 2020 and 2016. And I could,
which is another way of saying that it's X percent whiter than the nation as a whole.
Well, I mean, yeah, Georgia and North Carolina, not very white compared to the rest of the country. Arizona, not very white compared to
fair enough.
Wisconsin. Though Wisconsin does have a substantial African-American population. The way I think about it is,
and their white people are more intensely white.
It's a Hazian level of whiteness, right? Yes. It really gets you there.
A lot of white men over bites at the fish fries.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I disagree. I want to be temperate. I understand that people love models and projection models, and I dig it. It's cool. They're fun. I like to see them. I like to fool around with them. And peace be unto both Nates. May their models flourish.
And if people quote this out of context and it gets back to Jessica Malugin, you're Jessica, let us be clear that when you say you like to fool around with models, we're talking about...
Yes, only election forecast models.
Yes, okay.
But you don't really need them because you know what a model is. You put we'll go back to salami. You grind up all the different bits and then you extrude out your log of projection and there it is. Well, what do you put into it? Right. So you say, well, my model weights more for historical performance in individual states. Well, my model weights in fundraising. Well, my model weights in. Okay, that's cool. That's fine. It's all interesting. It's great. These probability models that say Kamala Harris has a 56.3% probability of winning the presidency is at best potentially misleading for normal news consumers because it looks like the polls, right? So she's up 8 points. And it's like, no, she's not up 8 points. Her probability is 8 points. And you're like, well, I mean, come on, like just keep. I think for lay people, keeping it simple is a pretty good idea. The whole idea of the note that I do for the Dispatch is we just do an average of the 5 most recent high-quality national polls. The swing states, the Democrats are going to come in under that. 2 points is a good. If you're looking for a rule of thumb, where's the race? About 2 points. Last week, Kamala Harris was up 1.6 points nationally. That's as close as you could. That's as close as you can get it
to a tie.
Yeah, that's as close as you can get it. But the polls, and this is the thing about models and this other stuff, polls will be wrong. Of course, the polls will be wrong. The polls are always wrong. But we don't know by how much, and we don't know in which direction.
Right.
In 2012, Barack Obama was dramatically understated. And when he came in and rang the bell in Ohio and in Florida, bang, bang, right away, it was like, what is this? But people don't remember it because the expected outcome occurred. He was leading Mitt Romney, and he ended up whooping Mitt Romney. But it wasn't 2016, where Hillary Clinton improved over the final polls, but Donald Trump improved by enough to get inside the swing state shift. She was winning by 4.5 nationally or something, and she ended up winning by 2.2 points because he closed that gap at the end. Some of it is polling error. Some of it is people actually deciding late, right? That the actual doing well. Wisconsin, you can tell a very convincing story about Wisconsin in 2016 and late deciders, right? Why were the polls off in Wisconsin? The polls were off in Wisconsin. Well, part of it is polling error, and part of it is people changed their minds or decided late. The obsession that Republicans have about shy Trump voters, you're talking about the shy Trump voters, that's hogwash.
Yeah.
What there are polling error problems which relate to who can you get to complete a survey? Who can you get to complete a survey? If you have a hard time getting working class white men to complete a survey, the men who you will get to complete your survey will not be representative of the group. The deeper you have to mine in that seam of coal to get the BTUs that you need, it's going to get strange the deeper that you get in. And whereas groups like college-educated women, they're very easy to poll. Yes, they're happy to help, for reasons that relate to their availability, their skepticism of polling, and all of this stuff. Response rates are not evenly down, they're unevenly down. Getting people to respond to pollsters, it wasn't that everybody just became equally less willing to participate in polls once caller ID came to pass. It was an uneven distribution. Right. And that means it's harder to get the right number of those people to meet your demographic standards. And therefore, the people that you get to meet your demographic standards will be unrepresentative. So you do have actual polling error, but that's not shy Trump voters. But then you do have the people who decide late. In this election, let's say today that there's 3%, 2% of persuadable voters who are high propensity, likely voters are going to vote, and they honestly don't know what they're going to do. So we can talk about motivation and we can talk about persuasion. Motivation, why do Democrats love the issue of abortion? They love the issue of abortion for the same reason Republicans love the issue of immigration, which is for the next slices of salami. It's like, you better vote. I know you don't want to vote. You're busy. You don't really care about this. You think this is all a fraud. But here's one thing in your life that you know you have to get up and vote for. So your theory about the Alex Jones data is true, right? That's in motivation. How do you get your people to go to the polls? And then what do you do about that last, 3 million voters who are genuinely, I'm going to vote. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do, and I haven't really made my mind up yet. And now we're going to spend the last 34 days and however many billions of dollars chasing those poor people down through the streets of suburban Pittsburgh and Milwaukee and Charlotte.
So one of the things I like about the theory that Harris is losing, or the Republicans are losing their advantage in the Electoral College argument, is, first of all, if Democrats have an advantage in the Electoral College, we'll stop hearing about getting rid of the Electoral College for a while.
Until
Trump says we got to get rid of the Electoral College, right? But secondly, there's a certain monkey paw curse dynamic to this. both of our adult lives, we've been hearing endlessly, and for good reason, for high-minded patriotic reasons, for all sorts of reasons, that Republicans need to do better reaching out to blacks and Hispanics. They need to deal with the problem with blacks and Hispanics, and it would be good for us. It would be good for the Republican Party. It'd be good for us as a country, because it would take the sting out of a lot of identity politics if different identity groups voted roughly equally for both parties.
Right.
You can no longer claim that one political agenda is the expression of the true agenda of the true black people or the true gay people or the true this or true that. I like all of the shattering and category stuff. But I also, the monkey paw part comes in insofar as if Trump does better with blacks and Hispanics,
right,
most of the places where that will manifest itself will mean that he loses by a smaller margin,
right,
to the Democrats, right? Because a lot of those people are in California and in New York and these places that are still going to vote Democratic.
Yeah.
But instead of by 20 points, it'll be by 10 points or something like that. Doesn't mean anything for Trump. And I like the whole idea of I've fulfilled the prophecy. We've been fighting for this for so long, and it actually didn't help me win. There's something kind of just about that. But it also gets to what I think, where I agree with you in the states that it matters. The shy Trump voter thing, I think, is kind of bogus, right? But a lot of the people who talk about shy Trump voter are like Fox hosts and talk radio people who live in New York City,
right,
who live in Washington, D.C., who live in L.A., and they know lots of shy Trump voters.
Well, they
live in very liberal places. And so, like, if all those shy Trump voters in the Upper West Side of Manhattan vote for Trump, Trump's still going to lose Manhattan. He's still going to lose New York.
Right. One is a social phenomenon. The other is an imagined statistical phenomenon.
Right.
And so the thing about there are all these people, and there is a lot of truth to the fact that Trump is getting you could argue that Democrats' advantage in the popular vote. You could argue that Republicans' advantage in the Electoral College is going down, or you could argue that in the same way that the Democrats' advantage in the national popular vote is going down.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
Because if we're doing baloney, right? If it's homogeneous, if we have been very well sorted, and all of the conservatives, well, I don't know what they are now, but all of the right wingers are Republicans and all the left wingers are Democrats, and we're real well sorted geographically, and we're real well sorted in all of those ways. And our politics has been so brutally, ruthlessly nationalized. And of all the problems that we have, a lack of regional affinity, a lack of state and regional partisanship, lowercase p partisanship, is a big one. If we have just the blob, these two blobs, there's the blue team and there's the red team. There's the good guys and the bad guys. We're good, you're bad. And if you have that would have a flattening effect on all of those interesting differences. I believe that Kamala Harris is underperforming Joe Biden. And there's a slew of, we're now in the season of all of the polling. And I'm so happy. It's finally here.
You're radiant.
I'm radiant. I'm so happy it's finally here. Kamala Harris was underperforming Joe Biden by 8 and 10 points with black voters in Georgia, where the electorate in Georgia is 29% black. Donald Trump was not performing any better than he did in 2016 with black voters. Who's going to get those black votes? Because that person will win Georgia. Whichever one of them that 10% that's sitting out right now, that person will win Georgia for sure, because Georgia has a large black population. And who's the 10%? Are the 10% younger voters who are most likely, and sadly, America, when we say younger voters, we mean under 50. But are these younger voters who have most acutely felt the pains of inflation, because that's who the people who get it the worst are young, tend to be younger and not as economically established and secure as other people. Who are they? I don't know. I wish I could tell you. But wherever that 10% of the black electorate in Georgia goes is going to win Georgia. And Trump doesn't have to win all of them. If he splits them with Kamala Harris and he outperforms with black voters in Georgia by just a fraction, just the width of one MAGA hat, it's probably enough. And conversely, if Kamala Harris overperforms with white suburbanites in Arizona by just an oomph, right? When you're talking about a demographically large enough section. And the last thing I say about all that is people who believe that race and ethnicity is this powerful force in American political life are right in many, 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 many ways. From the framing of our Constitution to Jim Crow to the civil rights, incredibly powerful. But I will say that if you said, Chris, I want you to predict how people are going to vote, obviously the story of Black America is unique, and the monolithic nature of black voters in America, where 90% of black voters have been Democrats for so long, definitely is significant. But for everybody else, for everything else, I'd much rather know your educational attainment level. Right. I'd much rather know your zip code. I'd much rather know your income. I'd much rather know those things. We obsess about race in a way that is really unhealthy and distortive. Hispanic voters in Arizona has an electorate that is bigly Hispanic, right? Mm-hmm. And Donald Trump's getting 45% of Hispanic voters in Arizona. He's not going to get 45% of Hispanic voters in California. Right. Because they're different people in different states, and those states, each state has its own nature, but each state has a nature in relation to the other states.
All right, we're running out of time, and this has been, other than our digression on Piggly Wiggly, a remarkably responsible and above board episode.
I know. It's because we've both been working. We've been talking about this. We're in this season.
It's the life we've chosen. But one thing you haven't mentioned, which comes up a lot, two things. One, what's going to happen with the Senate? And two, the House is basically going to go whichever way. Whoever wins the presidency is probably going to win the House.
That's the safe bet. So on the House, it goes like this. In 2020, the Republicans shocked the world because they actually picked up seats.
I'm just grabbing a beer.
Okay. Head to the mountains. In 2020, the Republicans actually picked up seats in the House despite getting clobbered in the national popular vote.
Because of New York.
Well, because of New York and a couple seats in California, they won back in 2020 seats that the Democrats had taken in the 2018 wave.
Right.
So just for context here, for normal people, there's 45, 50 House seats in the out of 435, there's 40 House seats that are possibly going to be competitive, right? The universe of House spending comes down to this, few dozen seats that might be competitive. And the Democrats in 2018 had their best midterm year in 40 years, right? They nailed it. They got them all. And then in 2020, Republicans pulled back a bunch, right? And they actually gained 5 seats, and it was enough. Mm-hmm. And then when you get the Biden midterm, and the Republicans, they did it. It was like we did it. Oh man! And they got there. But the reason that the 2022 wave for Republicans, there are a lot of reasons why the House performance for Republicans wasn't as good in 2022 as it was expected to be. But one of them was they already ate dessert first. Right. They got those seats back in 2020. So the freebies that you're supposed to get in a midterm, because that's the way that the midterm election works, is the party that is coming into power gets seats that they typically don't win in a quadrennial. And then you come back the next time and you take them back and you say, we won 40 seats, da-da-da-da-da. Long way of saying, I don't know how many seats are available to Republicans that they could possibly win to push back against the seats that they're very likely to lose, right? That we know some seats that they're very likely to lose. You mentioned New York, California, and all a very long way of saying which party will have a useless majority in the House. Right. I don't know. Who will have an agonizing time being held hostage by thirsty radicals? Will it be Hakeem Jeffries? Will it be Mike Johnson? I don't know which of them it will be, but the majority, I cannot imagine a situation in which the majority is a double-digit majority for anybody, which is to say that not much can be accomplished on party lines. On the Senate side, I got to tell you, this Sherrod Brown, man, he is a tough out. Mm-hmm. This guy is a tough monkey. Bernie Moreno is underperforming, but I will be not totally surprised. I will be very impressed by Democrats if they can manage to pitch a strikeout here, because they've got 3 races in Montana, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, where they got incumbent Democrats in either very competitive states. I mean, I think Bob Casey's the hardest out of those, because I think Harris is on her way to winning Pennsylvania. If something doesn't change, she's looking good for Pennsylvania right now, or better than Trump. But you got to figure John Tester, Sherrod Brown. One that wouldn't surprise me would be, or the least surprising surprise would be Kari Lake wins in Arizona, because if Donald Trump is as far ahead in Arizona as some polls currently show him to be, if he really wins Arizona by 4 points, I don't think that Ruben Gallego is going to win by 5 points. I don't think Donald Trump and Ruben Gallego are going to get the same share of the vote in Arizona. So it would still be very, very surprising if the Republicans did not have a Senate majority. And I will say this, when Kamala Harris said in a radio interview, she said that she agreed with doing away with the filibuster, I thought, don't say that if you want to win. If you want to be president and you're going to all this trouble to talk about how much you love the Cheneys, which is just my favorite. Here we are. Yeah. Here we are is, okay, Democrats embrace, checks notes, the Cheney family. Yes, good. Okay. So she's spending all this time on getting the Cheney Republican, Kinzigerian Republicans and doing all this heavy lifting over here. And then goes out in a radio interview and is like, yeah, I'd blow up that filibuster. We should jam.
But just for abortion.
Yeah, I promise, only for abortion. Yes, that was bad. We'll call it bad staff work.
Yeah, no, look, I gave a talk recently where I made the point that, like, if you think, first of all, if you don't live in one of the swing states, there's no reason not to vote your conscience, right? And whether it's a write-in or whatever, binary choice thing does not apply in a state that you know Harris or Trump is going to win by 5 or 10 points, right? So, like, send a signal, write in the kind of Republican to signal that you were a gettable Republican vote, or
don't vote, or do whatever you
leave
want.
It blank, or if you think Harris is going to win, vote for the Republican for Senate so that they can't get rid of the filibuster, or vice versa. I mean, like it gets to this thing about the nationalization of politics is people think that, like, somehow strategic voting is a sin, and it drives me crazy. But I will say, so one thing, the other thing that I want to get to, and then I will let you go. I will unshackle you. The one thing you didn't talk about, which when you talk to people in private, the political pro people.
So you got me shackled and in private now? I don't know how I feel about this, Jonah.
You get, the fact that Trump has moved so much of his money into voter integrity.
Yeah.
And the Harris people are apparently, I think Semaphore had the number. It was like $5 million a day more than the Trump people.
Just hammering it.
And so, like, the question is, like, what is the relationship between, because I assume voter turnout efforts are a smorgasbord of different things,
sure,
right? How much of that is reflected in polls, or is it invisible to polling? Is it because, like, some voter get out the vote efforts are like going on people's porches and convincing people to vote for your candidate. That presumably, if they're persuasive, shows up in polling to some extent, right?
If I want to know whether today is a good day to play golf, and I say to you, what's the weather like? I don't need a very specific answer, right? You can say, it's actually, it rained a little earlier, but I think it's fine. And it feels like it's probably, mid 70s. Yeah. That's more than enough information for me to decide whether I want to play golf. If I want to make microchips, I need a much more specific forecast. Yeah. I need to know the barometric pressure. I need to know all of this other stuff. You
also need to know how to make microchips, which you do not know how to do.
We'll fake it till you make it. The first batch is probably going to be off. Yeah. I'm not going to lie. They'll probably be big.
Remind me to tell the Ukrainians not to buy drones from you.
Yeah,
but anyway,
exactly.
Go on. Okay.
So the polls that we have that are available to us. So what are the best polls that we have? We got the Wall Street Journal poll, which is okay. We've got the NBC News poll, which is delicious. We've got the New York Times the New York Times is spending more money on polling this year. It's amazing. I thank you, New York Times, just doing all this stuff. But this, compared to what these campaigns have, Donald Trump's campaign in 2020 spent more than $7 million on polling. Joe Biden's campaign spent more than $5.5 million on polling. They're polling all the time. They're polling with sample sizes so big that you could stretch them out end to end and walk across the country. You have these huge polls that are going on constantly. We get these little snapshots. We get the snapshot that says, is today a good enough day to play golf? They're getting the kind of data with the N, the size of the sample large enough and conducted frequently enough that they're catching it, right? These super PACs and these campaigns are catching, if turnout efforts are being successful, they're getting more data and more information than we are, but we just basically can tell you which direction the wind's blowing.
So, but presumably some get out the vote efforts don't show up in polls because they're about making
Certainly
sure
not
you
in
have
our polls.
Well, they're also about stuff that hasn't happened yet, for making sure there are enough buses to get people to elections, or that you've distributed enough absentee ballots, or you've had enough conversations with people and all that kind of stuff. The question is does a good ground operation, what is it worth in a very tight election? Is it a point? Is it 2 points?
Ask the Romney campaign in 2012.
Wow.
What the cost of the bad? I don't know. I
know what the cost of a bad one is.
Yeah.
I know people work with Orca, and it's horrifying.
Yeah, and so the way I think about campaign expenditures is we don't know if we can't prove that they work in every case, but we can certainly show when people failed to take every possible measure. And I think the Republicans are going to get shellacked on these questions. And one of the built-in advantages the Democrats have is that they have union support, right? They've got the SEIU, they've got the AFL-CIO, they got the teachers unions, they got all that stuff. That's ground game. We have lots of evidence to point to the highest predictor of moving a voter in terms of how they're scored of likelihood to vote on a 1 to 5 scale, in-person contact. It's still you started us at NA plus ultras. It is still the NA plus ultra of if a person comes to your door and says, we really, really need you. Now, I would hate for someone to come to my door and bother me because I don't want anyone to come to my door because I'm a misanthropic hillbilly. But for motivating voters to come out, if people come to your door and say, please, Mr. Goldberg, please, 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 we need you to come vote. That is we have the proof. We have the evidence about if you make personal contact, how much contact every individual voter gets. I believe that the Democrats will be saturation bombing every single precinct where their voters are, and they're going to be getting them out and they're going to be doing it. Donald Trump will win if he overcomes that on a vibe. Right. So we talk about Harris as the vibes candidate, but Trump's really the vibes candidate. Right. Trump it's a notional candidate, the notional presidency and candidacy of Donald Trump. If people buy it and he gets that last little Kentucky windage at the end and half those black voters in Georgia and they move, then he'll win. And if they don't, he'll lose.
All right. Chris Stirewalt, thank you so much for being here.
We did it.
Another one under the belt. And obviously you'll be back. So we don't really, I don't even have to ask you. And thank you again. Okay, so Brother Stirewalt has literally left the studio, and it's good to talk to him. I went into this thinking I was going to talk a lot about the debate stuff, and I'm kind of glad that we didn't. But I could use more Piggly Wiggly and less polling minutiae. But if you're going to get a data dump on how this stuff works, there are a few people you can go to who are better at it than Brother Stirewalt. And but if you're still addicted to more granular, direct on the debate punditry, we did a dispatch live last night, which is going to be somewhere up on the site. I was very tired and cranky, and I was listening to at least the first half of the commentary podcast, which they did at a emergency podcast last night, and it was pretty good. Part of my problem when I listen to when I watch these debates is I'm looking at my phone or looking at my computer, I'm talking to people in Slack or texting with people. I miss a lot of things, and then people say, "Oh, that was a great line." And I'm like, so I have to like sort of do a recap, even though I watched the thing. But I stand by my prediction that this will seem like a long time ago and will not amount to much. The only reason I think it matters more than a normal vice presidential debate is that at least as of now, there won't be another presidential debate, and Harris could really use another opportunity to fill in some of the blanks with undecided voters. I also think Chris is a little too dismissive of my point about the subset of weirdos who find Candace Owens and Alex Jones compelling, and that's what they're trying to leverage. And it would not shock me if those people don't poll very well, because you'd have to put down the Xbox controller to answer a poll. But we shall see. Probably have him back before the election's over. Definitely have him back multiple times afterwards. I talked about the dispatch event in November. I think there's still time to get tickets. You should come out. The agenda is filling out really nicely. A lot of interesting people coming. You can learn more about it if you're a Dispatch subscriber at the site. We'll put a link in the show notes if you want to investigate that. I will be there. I can't promise that Zoe and Pippa will attend. They don't do great with massive crowds seeking autographs. But other than that, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.
No, you won't. This is a podcast.